Yeah, so that makes me wonder, how do you get hooked into stories as a writer? Are you someone who starts with characters or something that you've researched that, becomes an earworm, or are you more visual? Where does the story begin for you?
You know what? It really depends on the idea.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. I literally just had a series idea come to me just last week. I was on the sofa with my daughter watching Taylor Swift's Eras tour on Disney. Her song Vigilante Shit came on. And out of nowhere, like a bolt of lightning, I had this idea that it was so concrete that I grabbed my cell phone and I wrote out an email to my agent, like, oh my God, just outlined it all. Like I had a pitch, I had it breaking down what I wanted to do with the series, what sort of topics and issues I can address. And I sent it to her. And I, for this series, like I know like the general big picture, but I haven't allowed myself to think about the individual characters, like who the female main characters would be, who the male main characters would be, any of the tropes. Like I haven't thought about it. It was just the series idea that felt very concrete. With the
Mm.
Luna sisters, it started with an idea of the second French occupation of Mexico. I was like, how could I do something with this idea about this moment in history? How could I set a story within this time frame? Because I thought the history was really interesting. And I thought of three cousins initially. And then I changed it to sisters because I wanted them to have a closer familial connection.
Mhm.
And then I started thinking about who they were, like who they were as people and what they would be doing and what would they be feeling to leave behind everything they knew in Mexico and come to London. Like how would that make me feel, and what if they were not friends and they didn't like each other, and how would that affect their dynamics because now they have to depend upon each other. So for them, for the Luna sisters, it was very character driven, whereas in, like I said, this new idea I had was just the big picture idea.
Yeah.
So I really just, for me, it just depends. I will say that I tend to be inspired by the characters first and then build a story around them. But every so often, I'll be like, okay, for some reason, this nugget of history or this, whatever, I feel like this trope would work really well with it. And if I were to use this trope, what sort of characters would fit that trope the best? Or how can I, expand upon it, or, whatever. But most of the time, I do start with the characters and build from them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you always, like when you started thinking about the French occupation or invasion, when you first thought of the series, did you always know that it would end up in Britain? Or is that something that you thought, like, oh, to be able to sell this book, I'm going to have to put it in Britain?
Oh, absolutely that. Absolutely. Like,
Okay.
to be honest, absolutely. I knew with the trad pub market, I knew that if I, to get the most attention on it, that it would be best to set it someplace familiar.
Mhm.
I have written other series that have gone out on submission that were not set in the UK. They were set elsewhere, and they did not sell.
Mhm.
So when I had this idea, I made that choice purposely.
Yeah.
And I will say, though, that the series doesn't stay in England. It does go to Mexico. So
Okay.
there will be peaks at, not even peaks, there will be time spent there.
Yeah.
So, and initially because before I write a book, I like write up a synopsis to share with my editor, just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking is going to happen for this book. And I included the bit about them going to Mexico. And my agent was like, they may push back on that. So just, heads up, they may push back. So maybe have a plan B. And I was like, okay, I didn't have a plan B because I was willing to go to bat for this, but I really wanted it to go to Mexico. And thankfully, my editor came back to me and it was like, we're going to Mexico. It was like in all caps in her email back to me. Like she was so excited. And so I'm really glad that they were supportive of that. But
Yeah.
I will be honest, it was a decision that I consciously made for the market.
Yeah. And how is it researching Mexican history because, one of the things that makes writing British historicals somewhat easy is there's so much online resources, and Britain as a country has been stable enough that their records by and large have been continuous, and they're archived on all the different universities so you can
Mhm.
access them. How has it been researching Mexican history?
It's hard, especially because a lot of the resources are in Spanish, and I am not a fluent Spanish speaker. I can get by and I am learning. I've Honestly, I've been very blessed that I took Mexican history courses when I was an undergrad. It
Mm,
was my minor, and I saved all those books. So I
wow.
have them at my disposal. So when I started to plan out the series, I was like, oh, there's a reason I still have all these old textbooks. And so they have been invaluable to me. I have a book specifically about women in Mexico that spans a certain period of time. I have a specific book about Juarez and Maximilian, who Juarez was the democratically elected president of Mexico during the occupation, and Maximilian was the French tapped emperor of the Second Mexican Empire under the French. So I have these resources that were available to me. And also, my publisher was very, very good to me in so much that I asked for authenticity readers to put their eyes on the book to make sure that I got my Spanish right, that the details that I included were correct. In María and The Fox, Gideon is a Black man in Parliament, and I am not. And I wanted someone to read for that. And they were always so good about finding readers to read for those parts of the books, to make sure that the perspectives I was sharing, that the language I was using, and that the history I, set my story in were as accurate as they could be. But definitely it was challenging.
Yeah. That's fantastic that they honored your request
Mhm.
for authenticity readers. I've heard of
Yeah.
other authors paying for it on their own,
And I was
on the
prepared
side.
to. Yeah, I was absolutely prepared to do that. And they were like, "Oh, we'll get it." And they did.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.